Well, this is a first. Today I uploaded a video about the 6 dirtiest players in NBA history, and YouTube actually deemed the video as unfit for non-adults, and instantly made the video age restricted. Because of this, I basically make no money off of the video, and much of my audience doesn't have access to it. Well, seeing that YouTube apparently wants my videos to have the intensity of a Bob the Builder episode, I decided to chug 3 soy lattes and completely neuter the video with childish edits, and then re-upload the video with no sarcastic or passive-aggressive edits towards YouTube whatsoever. If you'd rather watch the heavy metal, rebellious, criminal version, that is still available on the channel for those above the age of 18. For the rest of you, this will have to do. Most days on my channel, I like to highlight the strengths and positive aspects about various NBA players, but today is not one of those days. On this day, we're taking a look at the 6 dirtiest players in the history of the league. Now first, let me explain. In no way do I believe that my list is an objectively correct list, but it's simply my opinion based on my experience while watching these players. There's several factors that went into my ranking, like how often the players committed dirty plays, how egregious were the offenses, and how long were they doing it throughout their careers. There's so many players who could have been on this list but didn't make it, so let me know in the comments if there's a player I left off that you would put into your top 6. So without further ado, let's get into it. Number 6, Zaza Pachulia. This 6'11 center had a 16-year career, and he was never an all-star, and most people would describe him as average at best. But to many people, he'll be remembered for a long time for all the wrong reasons. In many instances, Zaza looked as if he was trying to outright hurt people, and if I'm being honest, he hasn't always been the best at hiding it. The most memorable moment of his career was when he slid his foot under a jump-shooting Kawhi Leonard in Game 1 of the 2017 Western Conference Finals. At that point, the Spurs were leading the game by 19 points, and appeared as if they were about to steal home court advantage in the series. Instead, Kawhi was lost for the series, and the Spurs were swept. This unnatural defensive play may have had a history-changing ripple effect on the NBA as a whole. But trust me when I say this, that play was far from the only instance of Zaza playing with questionable motives, and based on the fact that his legacy is alive today because of his dirty antics, he gets the starting spot on my list. Number 5, Draymond Green. I can already hear the screeching 14-year-old Warriors fans in the chat, because I just picked 2 straight players from Golden State. But to be fair, Zaza only spent 2 of his 16 seasons with the Warriors, so most of his dirty plays were with other teams. Back to Draymond though, it kinda blows my mind how many Warriors fans continue to defend Draymond, as if he's some kind of saint. My thought process is there's only so many times a player can be the center of an altercation before we start to label him a dirty player. And for me personally, I came to that conclusion a long time ago. Some players have very specific dirty antics, and we'll get into that in a bit. But as for Draymond, he executes his dirty maneuvers in a variety of ways, like stomping on players' chests, like kicking them in the junk, slapping them in the junk, and slapping them in the face. Although he's certainly one of the greatest defensive players to ever live, Green usually never passes up an opportunity to dish out some punishment, just vaguely enough for it to look like it was an accident to some. If you ask me, Green is one of the more subtle, dirty players in NBA history, but based on the insane number of frequent offenses, I think he definitely deserves a spot on this list. Number 4, Metta World Peace, formerly known as Ron Artest. He wasn't the most frequent offender, and although he played physically, he likely had the fewest dirty plays out of any player in my top 6. But with that being said, World Peace committed some of the most egregious dirtiness that the game of basketball has ever seen. Obviously, he was the player who famously triggered the Malice at the Palace, when he ran into the stands to punch some fans who admittedly deserved to get Artest was involved in several altercations that night, but in hindsight, maybe the most shocking dirty play was when he absolutely wrecked James Harden's temple with an utterly elbow. This instance was especially ridiculous because at this point, he now had the words "World Peace" written across his back. Like Draymond, he was also an all-time great defensive player, but as in the case of many of those intense, energetic types, they tend to take things a step too far every once in a while, and our test was no exception. Number 3. Karl Malone. Remember in Draymond Green's segment when I said there were players with more specific types of dirty? Well, there's no better example of that than Karl Malone, who was constantly throwing around some of the most and elbows that I've ever seen. On a side note, imagine being a player who was throwing around elbows throughout the entirety of your career and is also the player with the most technical fouls in NBA history, yet neither of those things are the most negative thing you're remembered for. Regardless of his basketball skills, that is the legacy of Karl Malone. As I was saying about his elbows, they were insanely and it didn't help matters that he was one of the strongest and most powerful players of all time. In several cases, he even knocked out the opposing player. One of those players was Elliot Perry, who didn't play in the final 38 minutes of that game due to the KO blow. Another player was the Hall of Fame center David Robinson, who went so limp that it almost looked like he was going to break his leg from the fall. Robinson is also one of the strongest players in the history of the game, and the mailman dropped him in an instant with one of the most devastating cheap shots that you'll ever see. The most famous incident, though, was when Malone dealt this punishing blow to Isaiah Thomas in the first quarter of a regular season game. Isaiah described the contact by saying that it felt like he had just been shot in the head. Amazingly, Isaiah actually returned to the game in the fourth quarter. At the end of the day, these were just a few crazy examples of his most punishing signature move in the NBA. And considering how much he loved to dish out these elbows, it's no wonder why he tried his luck in the WWE. Number 2. Bruce Bowen. It takes a lot of dirtiness to be ranked ahead of the mailman, but Bowen earned his spot with his devious schemes. Although he was the Defensive Player of the Year runner-up for 3 straight seasons, I'm not gonna lie, I'm glad he never won the award because of his antics on the court, including his flying Bruce Lee Bowen kick to Wally Szczerbiak's face. Also when he unnecessarily stepped on Kobe's wrist in the playoffs, and him repeatedly sliding under the foot of the jump shooter as he was landing. Seriously, go back and watch some Bruce Bowen footage, and you'll see that this maneuver of his was about as consistent as the fadeaway was for Michael Jordan. No player knows that better than Vince Carter, who had his ankle rolled a total of 3 times by the Spurs defender, and on the third instance, you could tell things had reached a boiling point with Carter. But make no mistake, he tried this cheap tactic with many other stars, including Kobe Bryant, Michael Finley, and Paul Pierce. The funny thing is, Bowen has an argument for the top spot, but unlike the guy in first, Bowen isn't a bold kind of dirty. But he's rather quiet about it, and still says to this day that he's never tried to intentionally hurt anyone. The film seems to strongly suggest otherwise, and for this reason, he securely takes the runner-up spot on my list. Number 1. Bill Laimbeer. This man is the face of what is likely the dirtiest team in the history of the NBA, the bad boy Detroit Pistons. Laimbeer's reputation was so awful within the NBA that he even had nicknames like the Prince of Darkness, His Heinous, and Axe. A bit of a dramatic reputation for simply a basketball player, but unlike Bruce Bowen, Laimbeer reveled in it, and loved knowing that he was hated by pretty much the entirety of the basketball community outside of Detroit. In the words of Larry Bird, Rick Mahorn would try to foul you hard, but his teammate Bill Laimbeer would try to hurt you. There's no one more suited to give that opinion than Bird, as it appeared that Laimbeer tried to hurt him on multiple occasions. As someone who's seen many of the games he was involved in, I can tell you that his punishing cheap shots was a very regular occurrence. Eventually, someone finally decided to return the favor, as the Celtics center Robert Parrish struck Laimbeer across the face. The crazy thing about this play is that they didn't even call a flagrant foul, a technical foul, or a foul of any kind on Parrish. The ref simply stopped the action and resumed play as soon as Laimbeer had gathered himself, which seemed indicative of how the league felt about Laimbeer at the time. He might not have the ugliest acts of violence on his resume, but based on how frequently Laimbeer was punishing other players, I'm very comfortable putting him in the top spot on this list of notorious players. So what do you guys think? Who was a candidate for the dirtiest player that wasn't on my list? I look forward to hearing your picks in the comments section below. Thanks for watching as always, make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.